Hello and welcome to Note to File, a clinical research podcast.
A collection of interviews, candid commentary, and general nonsense for the clinical research community.
Check us out at notetofilepodcast.com.
And now, without further ado, on to the show.
Hey guys, welcome to another Note to File Live, a sticky notes edition on today's April 30th, 2025. It's sad that I had to check my notes.
Last day, April, man.
It is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Most importantly, today is National Oatmeal Cookie Day. But not only that, it is also National Raisin Day, which really feels like a missed opportunity to be.
Huge missed opportunity. But I don't know. I mean, do you even like oatmeal raisin cookies?
I do. I know that they're not necessarily super well liked, but I'm a fan of the oatmeal raisin. What's your favorite cookie?
So my favorite oatmeal cookie is oatmeal butterscotch chip.
That's not a real cookie. You made that up.
It is the best oatmeal cookie. I will fight you about it.
Where do you get such cookie?
You make them.
Oh, well.
Okay. Like, you know, you have like chocolate chips and cherry chips and butterscotch chips. Add them in the oatmeal.
No, snickerdoodle or die.
I guess it is kind of a snickerdoodle type cookie.
Snickerdoodle's the best cookie.
I don't know about that.
All right. If you're in the comments, tell me what your favorite cookie is. Winner gets a prize. I don't know what the prize is. The prize is a cookie.
No, it's an oatmeal butterscotch chip cookie because they're clearly the best.
Okay. We'll send them one of those and one snickerdoodle cookie, and then they can decide which one is the best.
Okay.
Perfect. What's that? Otherwise, how's it going?
It's going good. Decent. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, like, I feel like, again, last day of April, I don't know where the fuck the month went. Like, it's now going to be May soon. Baseball season is starting. I don't know, man. Life's crazy.
It's the NBA playoffs.
NBA playoffs, yeah.
I'm not mad about.
Bucks are doing decent. Thunder's. Well, you know, they're fine.
They're in it.
They're in it. They're there. Thunder's doing good.
Wait, yeah. They swept their series, waiting for the second rounds. I think actually tickets technically go on sale today, even though they don't know when the games are yet. So that seems like a weird thing to do, but so it is.
I feel like that happens with the NFL too. Like they'll like sell tickets, and you're like, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what stadium or state I'm supposed to be in.
Got a ticket though. Ava, what's up, Ava? What is a DoubleTree cookie? Is that a cookie at a DoubleTree?
So okay, feel free to jump in, Ava. But my thing is like they have cookies. Like that's their thing. Is they do like warm cookies, like in the lobby, like where they have like cookies and stuff and like tea.
Fair enough. So not any one particular type of cookie.
I don't know. My gut thought's chocolate chip because I think that's like.
Okay, we need to know more.
I don't know. I need more details.
Provide context. We'll do that on our next podcast. Will be exclusively about cookies.
Just cookies. We're gonna do some clinical research about which cookie is better. Gonna write a protocol, recruit participants. It's gonna be great.
That's easy. You could do some nice double-blind experiment there. Dan, always promotional. That's true. We're selling tickets to SOS, and we don't know the date yet. So
at least through the state, though. That's
that's true.
Month, that's state true. General timeline.
But I think that's because we're so much like the NBA that we sell tickets and we don't know the exact dates yet. So
and you guys have very similar like revenue model, right?
Yeah, I mean we might be a little more popular than the NBA, but
that's fair.
They're catching up. All right, Ava, thank you. Warm chocolate chip, oatmeal.
So oatmeal chocolate chip, though, which is different than chocolate chip.
No, just put raisins in there and have a chocolate chip cookie and have an oatmeal raisin cookie.
No, you have a butterscotch chip oatmeal cookie.
Okay, well, we've definitely committed too much time of this talking about cookies. So
I don't think there's such a thing.
Let's just jump in. Let's jump in with what we got. I feel like it was not that it was a slow week, but we struggled a little bit for stuff that was too terribly exciting. Let's take a look here. I always struggle with my screen share, but we'll jump in. This is one that you had sent, which I think is interesting. And also, while the study here doesn't directly relate, to clinical trial participation, I have to think there's something you can take away from this. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, where I was thinking about, like, when I was reading this, it's fascinating that, like, you're looking at where younger folks are getting their medical advice from, which is kind of, I mean, I don't know, mixed feelings about it. I think it's absolutely important to, like, use all the resources you have available, but, like, I know my Aunt Pat doesn't have, like, advice on what I should be doing as far as, like, vaccinating my kids, right? Like, and so then thinking about how this is guiding into clinical research and people's perception, especially because it's so politicized at this point too. Like,
Right.
I thought a funny meme this morning. I think Edie Edens posted it about, like, science researchers, and they spend 2,000 hours of research, but then I'm on social media and I'm just, like, scrolling and I find this. I did so much research, so, like, trust me.
Right.
Like, those people are actually driving medical decision making, which is
which is what this study shows. I mean, you've seen a really big increase in people who are I don't know if primarily is the right word. We can scroll down a little bit more, but are taking medical advice more and more from friends or family members, or fairly about the same jump in social media. So having damn near 40% of people 18 to 34 getting their medical advice from social media is not insignificant.
Well, I think there's something that's a little bit lower too, that basically says, like, folks have not only are getting medical advice from these groups, but they're disregarding and going against medical advice from their actual providers.
Yeah, 45% of adults 18 to 34 said they've disregarded their health provider's guidance in favor of information from a friend or family member in the past year, a 13-point increase from previous year. And 38% of young adults say they've ignored their provider in favor of advice from social media, which is a 12-point increase, which is, I mean, and you talked about this as we were kind of prepping, but, like, what does that advice entail? I guess it's probably important, right?
Well, right. I mean, if it's like, don't drink on the weekends, and my friend's like, hey, have a glass of wine, like, is it that medical advice? Or is it like, hey, you were diagnosed with cancer, you should probably do this therapy? And it's like, no, I'm gonna do this, like, cleanse that I'm gonna do a juice cleanse, right? Which, again, you are seeing that too, though, which is that's the terrifying part. So I don't know, like, as far as statistics go, like, what exactly they're talking about here as far as, like, what those things are, but
interesting. And there's a little bit more here that 67% of young adults are still engaging regularly with traditional news about healthcare. There was something in here, and of course now I can't find it. I didn't tag it, but there's still a fairly high amount that are also taking guidance, from their healthcare provider. But again, you have to think about that in terms of clinical trials, right? We already know that clinical trials doesn't have the biggest, or, like, awareness campaigns out there, so to speak. So if they're hearing more from social media or from their friends, which I guess that begs its own questions. If you're taking advice from your friends who are taking advice from friends who are taking advice from friends, it has to come from somewhere originally, right?
Yeah, but that could be like Karen decided one day this is what she felt was right and shared it with someone, and then you never know the origin. So it's just someone making shit up, and then that becomes a truth at some point. I kind of feel like that's how, like, not even, like, stepping back, not research, not healthcare, like, I feel like that stuff happens just in general, where, like, someone makes a decision that is based on probably nothing, and it becomes truth because so many people heard it and reiterated it.
Yeah, that's fair. So do you think this maybe, and again, not that a lot of clinical trial information isn't going to come from someone's doctor, but does this change a strategy, or, like, should we be focusing on more broad, social media education versus, right now it's really mostly, here's an advertisement for a study. But
I was going to ask you, like, how, because, like, when I think about this, obviously, like, the biggest thing is recruitment, right? Like, how this impacts recruitment, because people are getting access and information about trials. But I think that's right. Like, do you start leaning more into general awareness campaigns, and then also trial specific? Like, how does that impact marketing from a site perspective?
Where's the ROI? We need immediate ROI.
Let's get some KPIs on it, and then we can report up and, negotiate.
Yeah. So either way, maybe there's not, this is not direct correlation, but I still think it's pretty interesting and could certainly have an impact on how people are making their decisions to participate in clinical research. There's no question that there's a parallel there.
Well, I like the idea. I think I've seen some folks doing like more just general awareness campaigns of clinical trials in public, and I like the concept of that. I think in general, just having just more content out there for the general public. I know sometimes, especially like in the clinical research space, we end up in kind of an echo chamber where we're hearing all about it, but like how do you penetrate the larger population with information that's accessible and not like scary or that's more to like make this part of more general things in general.
Sure. Yeah, I don't disagree. And it's something that we're unlikely to solve in the immediate future, but
well, if we had better KPIs, maybe we would.
Look, you have one person who agrees with your
yes
oatmeal butterscotch, but Dan, I don't. Sorry, Dan.
Nope, Dan is one of the smartest people alive. Clearly, he is just demonstrating that for us.
No, I don't know how to kick somebody off of the stream, but if I could, then I would consider it, Dan. So better watch your P's and Q's. All right, we'll move on. We'll touch on this a little bit. I think we've talked about it in some regard. And I'm also going to caveat some of this by saying I'm probably one of the least informed people when it comes to some of these, decisions from the political side of things. But nonetheless, it's interesting. And it's, something else you put in the hopper here. So,
well, yeah. And I think, this is almost more of a question that I have for the folks out in the ether. But I think obviously we're seeing a lot of the impacts that are being shared across around the impact of tariffs on the pharma space or a lot of what I've been seeing is the publicity, the announcement of like increasing manufacturing presence. And so like we're building local domestic manufacturing facilities. But what I'm curious about is what would the impact be then on the R&D side of the house for these pharma companies? Like a lot of it is focused on much more direct. Like we are going to get tagged on these imported drugs, so we're going to make the drugs here. But how does that impact what's going to happen in the R&D space and like ergo the clinical trials space as a whole as an impact? Does not have an answer. I'd love to hear if folks are more in tune with this and have heard how these things are affecting internal R&D programs. I'd be really curious to hear more about it, but more.
Yeah. If you're smarter than us, then tell us, because and again, some of these things I'm just not well versed enough to know. Like, if we're looking at a 25% pharma tariff, and tariffs would only boost drug prices by 12.9% is something I feel doesn't align very well. It doesn't make sense to me anyway.
And you're pretty sure pharma's not taking a bath on the other.
Yeah, pharma's like, well, hey, we're great guys. We'll eat 12.1% of these tariffs. We're not going to increase drug prices, that extra. I don't see that being the case. Maybe there's some kind of algorithm here I'm just not familiar with. Something else I did find interesting that you kind of touched on. If I can find it, I'm really bad at this, but that I'm trying to slowly talk until I find what I'm looking for. It's not working. I'll have to. Pharma. They were doing some lobbying and discussion and written some papers, but they argued that tariffs would undermine efforts to boost domestic manufacturing, which is a goal of the current administration. So
yeah, so I get that though, because like opening a manufacturing plant for drugs is not just like setting up a tent in a backyard. Like you have to build massive facilities. You have to have all the building materials to do it. Domestically, we haven't been producing at a scale that currently supports that. So that has to ramp up. So where are the raw materials coming from, especially in something that's going to have to be so regulated and like complex?
Coming from a country in which we have ridiculously high tariffs with.
Correct. So like maybe the actual drug tariff is avoided through these efforts, but then you're being tagged with all of the actual like manufacturing and materials components of it. So I could see that. Again, that's just speculation, but it makes sense in my mind.
Yeah, again, I find it interesting, and I don't pretend to know how all these things directly affect each other, and not that it's even clear at this point. And even if this is something that's even still on the table at this point, because this article is from 5 days ago. We know there's been quite a bit of whiplash in terms of, some of these announcements, but
fun little roller coaster we're riding.
Right. But you have to think, if, drug companies are being hit 51 billion, it's not going to probably not be good for R&D, right?
Well, and generally, I mean, my very rudimentary understanding of how this is structured is there's the commercial side, which is going to be the manufacturing, the commercial business development of the existing drugs, and then there's the R&D side of the house. And there's generally some type of division within the organizations that have R&D and commercial. But ultimately, they're rolling up to one company. And so I have to imagine that there is going to be, if there not already is, an impact on what we're going to see here. And then, like, what happens at that point? Is it a reduction in pipeline? Is it difference in when we're negotiating budgets? How does that change budget negotiations for executing the trials? How does that change internal versus external services that they're contracting for? I mean, it's just, there are a lot of levers that they could pull to offset this. I just curious as to see how that will play off and what the general impact will be on the clinical research space in general.
Yeah, time will tell. And, we'll talk a little bit more about, things that may already be a direct impact, maybe not, but we'll see. Next, Dan, I know you're watching, so feel free to defend yourself. You don't need to defend yourself, not an attack. But Dan's been writing a lot about DCT, which, of course, I'm interested in, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way. But I saw when you originally posted this article, and that was the 17th. That was already almost 2 weeks ago. Damn. I started writing this long, rambling nonsense and ended up stopping myself. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll cover it on a sticky notes a little bit. So instead of writing a bunch of rambling nonsense, I'm going to just say a bunch of rambling nonsense. So bear with me. First of all, I do like the title, Big Benefits, Bigger Burdens, because I think that's really what it starts to boil down to when you're talking about the use of HCPs in DCTs. I hate the 3-letter acronyms, but just have
we
to
love
deal
them,
with
though.
it.
The industry loves it.
I know. Obviously, there's been FDA guidance. There's been movements. There have been trade organizations. There are companies springing up all around DCT. Now, I've been particularly interested in the use of HCPs simply because, if you're running research locally in your community, you have probably talked to a lot of doctors who have expressed an interest in being involved in clinical research, but maybe don't want to be a site, don't know how to be a site, etc. So it's occurred to me for a long time, like, how can we use these people and their goodwill and their interests to, contribute? But I think it's where it starts to get tricky. You talk about the guidance, and that, first of all, when permitted by trial protocol, which I do want to say, I've heard uproar from, different groups saying, like, oh, sites won't buy in, or whatever the case may be. First of all,
have you seen this in any protocols?
No, that's what I'm saying. No, that's what I'm getting to, is like, I've never even seen it offered in a protocol. So step one, I guess, is getting sponsored.
So this is a lot of speculation on something that's not actually ever going to be in practice.
Well, and I think too, if you step back, it could be that I have a little bit of a selection bias because of the types of trials I do, or that, again, there are layers to it. But I'll just say, well, I think that there are trials that are, like, great to be fully decentralized, but we're not really talking about HCP involvement in that regard. So you've kind of got, like, DCTs that are more, if you're doing a registry or sort of more real world evidence type things, great. Do full direct to patient DCTs. Those make perfect sense. And we're never really going to see those on the side because there's no need for us.
Right.
But the involvement of the HCP is where it gets tricky, right? So first of all, I do just want to point out, like, we don't really see it in trial protocols yet anyway. But he goes on to say, HCPs can only provide services that are part of routine clinical practice. So that's another, like, sticking point in my mind, because routine clinical practice is oftentimes, there's no routine for what is happening across these different clinics. I've approached clinics and been like, let's do some of this stuff and this was kind of before the guidance, just testing the waters to see, how some of this stuff may happen. And what you immediately run into, and he points it out here, you're talking about physical exams, vital sign measurements, blood draws, dispensing IP, things like EKGs, things that happen at a research visit. So the first thing I ran into was that most clinics don't do blood draws. And if they do, if they do a blood draw, they're drawing blood and they're leaving it for a local lab to come pick up.
Yeah.
The overwhelming majority of clinical trials are using central labs, which require special processing that has to be done. So that almost removes the blood draw ability
being on the table.
from an HCP. They're just not doing that as part of their regular care. EKGs are the same thing, unless you're working in a cardiology clinic. A lot of them don't have EKGs laying around.
Yeah, you're going to get that. So you're going to be referred out somewhere else too.
And so even if I stop right there, immediately you can only do a portion of a visit at an HCP office, because almost no visit I've ever seen is just a vitals and physical exam. See you later. There's just no research visit where that's the case.
Yeah.
They're getting blood drawn. They're getting an EKG. They're filling out assessments. They are being dispensed IP. And that's something that I still don't know. Again, maybe I'm wrong, but like dispensing IP is on a delegation log. It's got to be trained and delegated. So I don't know that that's something I could see comfortably having an HCP do. Plus, if you're working with 10 HCPs, is drug being shipped to all those places? Like that doesn't seem particularly viable.
Like standard practice of what a provider is doing anyway. Like I'm not going to get my medication from my HCP.
You're not. No, you're not. I guess, they may hand out samples in these places, but this is not. And in fairness, like, investigational product is different than medication, I guess. So, and you can get into like what that means, and maybe somebody who's an attorney could be better. And then, what it goes on to say that I think a lot of people tried to make a big deal about is that it means they don't have to be on a 1572, and they're not investigators or sub-investigators. Okay, that's fine. I mean, it's funny because it says that they're delegated.
So what are they?
And that's where I start to get a little bit silly with it, because the section here that I think Dan's not wrong about too is like having all this documentation and communication. Who's doing this? In my mind, it would be like the site, because the site really has to be the one working with, overseeing. The investigator is still the one who has the overall responsibility for dealing with this. If I have to write a contract, implement a system, and verify their credentials and licenses, if I have to develop SOPs and tasks, if I have to go through all of these things, why can they not simply be? I mean, they're pretty much 99% of the way to being an investigator. Well, that's just
sort of the question. It's like, why not just make them a sub-investigator at this point? Like, it's all of the work is there. Is it just like a less approval that needs to happen? Like, what's the difference?
I don't know. And this is where I'm again, like, it seems silly to like take it so far out of the site's hands. What I would like to be able to do is pick 7 HCP offices in my metro. If a visit can be done out of there, I'll send a coordinator over to do the stuff that can't be done or otherwise doesn't make sense to be done. But let them be a sub-investigator. What difference does it make? What additional, if you're already doing all of that, what's the additional burden of making them a sub-investigator? And I don't know. But originally in the guidance, there was all this stuff about creating a task log, which is just about as close to delegation log as you could possibly come. So again, I feel like now we're trying to get a little too cute. I think if instead sponsors were okay allowing more sort of satellite additional locations that could be utilized, then that would pretty much fix it without having to sort of rewrite more vague and bizarre verbiage. I just don't know why we're doing that to ourselves.
Well, I certainly see the benefit, right? Because like if you think about the patient, like being able to be seen where you are, like that's huge. But yeah, it seems silly to like, I mean, we do this a lot in the industry, it seems, but we over-engineer everything. And And so this seems just another flavor of it where, and I don't know where it's at because of the regulatory nature of some of what we're doing, that people feel comfortable with it. Like, what is the why that happens? But it certainly seems to be something we see across the board.
Well, and maybe this like is the pendulum. So it started with like sightless trials, and now it's like, well, maybe we can use HCPs, and then maybe it'll just turn into like, well, what if these HCPs are just an extension of an existing site?
Well,
which is
right.
where I think the sweet spot is, frankly.
And I think it has to be because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but as a site, you are still on the hook for anything that's happening at that HCP office. So you have all of the risk, all of the oversight that still needs to happen. Why not just actually have it be a satellite site then? Because you're ultimately responsible for it anyway. And this is just he's giving you the same level of responsibility and obligation with less of the actual oversight and authority to do so.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. And to Sarah's point, to see like including dispensing IP as a potential task that can be performed, but then saying, well, they don't need to know about the IP seems to immediately create a little bit of a
here's this drug.
Yeah.
Don't know anything about it, but you should put this in your body.
Which at that point they would just say, go ahead. I mean, again, just train them and delegate them and make them a sub-I. Plus, right. I think it would do good for the research community because you were getting people a little bit more accountability and a little bit more involved in the process. And again, they don't have to necessarily do all the things all the time.
Yeah.
But now they're getting a touch. Now they're getting a touch point. Now some of these guys, they want it on their CV. They want to be an investigator or sub-investigator, but again, I don't know. We'll see again. And maybe I'm underthinking it or overthinking it or somewhere in between, but nonetheless,
I'm certainly not overthinking it. So
you would never do such a thing.
Never.
Yeah. So anyways, that's maybe a small distinction, but I still think it's sort of like important. Like why are we doing all this stuff that we would already do? And maybe even more than we would already do if we just made them. Because look, I have a process for how to do things. Why do I want to write a new process for somebody
slightly
doesn't
different.
Work for me? Yeah, for it's slightly. I want to just roll them into existing processes, which I think could be done without
It's almost like that pain. Would make it more standardized and have more rigor attached to it.
Well, and that's a bigger question that I've always sort of struggled with too. But it is what it is. So we got one more. I'll move on. And this is not meant to beat up Dan in any way too, because I know he's just sort of working with what's the frameworks that are out there, which makes sense. But the whole thing has always been a little bit confusing to me. So, what can you do? Lastly, just because I always like to yank something from Reddit, saw a post up from, I don't know, it's been almost a full day now, 22 hours or so, about layoffs at PPD, project managers, associate project managers, programmers. Yeah, you can read the comments. I'm not necessarily going to go through all of it, but apparently it was a massive phone call from people from both early and late phase across a bunch of different therapeutic areas. There were some CRUs CRU in Orlando that was closed and all site staff let go. I'm assuming those are like early phase or phase 1 units, maybe
like the sites that they own, maybe.
Yeah, and if anyone has any feedback on that, let me know. It's interesting because again, we're seeing more and more of this. Someone's saying that hearing about lots of US based PMs being laid off. 20 sites were told they were closing this morning. Again, I can't verify the veracity of these claims, but I'd be curious to know.
I mean, we've been seeing this for a bit in general, as far as like the pendulum swing on the CRO space, right? Like we went like full service for a while, and now you see more stuff coming in house and using like portions of services. So ergo, if the trend now is for pharma to take more in house, CROs are doing less. To reach anything of what they're doing, they're going to have to do a reduction in force to make the numbers work. So maybe it is that, but also if you think about, are they seeing something in their future pipelines that are more indicative of what's going on in the larger ecosystem, where, we talked about, right, the tariffs and the impact on R&D. Are CROs now seeing something in their pipelines from pharma that's indicating there's going to be a reduction in project and engagements? And is that from just a swing, like I said, in the actual like how we're using CROs, or just the general pipeline in general?
Right. And I mean, I'm sure it's both to some degree. I'll pop up a few more comments here before we bounce, but Dan, I did read the article about the Academic Medical Center in North Carolina that's doing some DCT elements with oncology trials. I didn't have time today. The link is here. If I recall correctly, though, too, these were being utilized on some investigator-initiated trials, but had not yet been, sort of pressure tested and sponsor. Doesn't necessarily mean anything, but I do think it's an important distinction when you've got a little more control. You're writing the protocol.
You're writing the protocol.
Yeah,
right?
if you're writing the protocol, you can, you can get a little bit more, leeway, to a little more of a wide berth to play there.
Right.
And we'll see if sponsors have will take the risks or not. I'm sure some will, and it'll probably be fine. It's just that we know, I don't know, site work is already so messy and chaotic. I literally just had somebody text me right as we were starting who was like, hey, I'm at a site with a CRC today. Somebody who works on the tech side. Let's see what he said. Spending a full day shadowing with CRC. Such a stressful, difficult job. Yeah, I mean, it is. And then add in dealing with, a bunch of other sites that you don't even have a true even relationship with necessarily. They're just sort of, you're doing some stuff. Please help. And it's already challenging.
Right. I mean, it's like,
but check out that article.
Like managing up, managing sideways.
Yeah. Marisol, I know I've got a message of yours in my inbox, so I'm still waiting to message you back. But the site I left had 4 staff let go yesterday, and it was under the umbrella of PPD Thermo. So yeah, obviously there's some people being affected, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
Michelle, my condolences, being one of the APMs laid off. Lots of late phase. Yeah. So it sounds like it was maybe a fairly big, what do they call them?
Reduction in force.
What do they call them to make them not sound like ruining people's lives? Oh yeah, reduction in force.
Reduction in force. Yeah, I mean, like, and I will say, like, I've talked to folks that aren't even just in our industry. I think in the current climate we're in, I'm seeing this across the board. Like folks who are in just biotech or tech in general, that they're seeing the same things across the board, unfortunately.
Right. And Sarah's point, the issue with making HCPs sub-Is is all the stuff that we do. But if you go look back at the article too, like you'd still have to do a lot of this. You still have to make sure the HCP is, accredited or capable of doing the things that they're doing. We're still going to have to know where things are happening, from an address perspective. Yes, the GCP training it's a pain to get it done, but also, like, if we're being real, I want that person to have GCP training. I want them to know what good clinical practice is, because if they're interacting with the patient and generating anything that's going to be used in any way for a clinical trial, shouldn't they?
Yes. And if they're not, you have that risk.
Yeah. You would think so. Because, I mean, they're contributing to some way. And I think this is, again, FDA guidance doesn't help, because I think when it lists, who needs to do GCP training, who needs to be on a 1572, it's something like, who's contributing significantly to the conduct of the clinical trial. Well, that's a pretty fine line, pretty gray area.
Also pretty subjective.
Yeah, no, 100%. 100%. So yeah, again, probably not something we're going to solve, immediately, but I'm sure some people will start making some moves. And if I had to guess, it'll be more risk averse at first, and then maybe it'll, loosen up over time, but it'll be interesting to see either way. Cool. I don't know. That's all about we got. We've already kind of gone over our 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Well, next week we have Mary Beckwith from Lindis joining us. Same time, same place. So we'll be digging into that.
Yeah, I've been very curious about what Lindis does, and I think I've occasionally trolled them on some of their LinkedIn posts. I'm actually glad they're coming on, and
Yeah, hear a little bit more about what it is. Yeah.
So very cool, guys. Until next week, you can always hit us up on LinkedIn, our respective LinkedIns, or check us out at noteToFilePodcast.com. I don't really need to say this stuff anymore because we have a fun outro.
Catch you on the flip side.
Take it easy, guys. Thank you. Thanks for listening to Note to File. We're committed to continuing to bring you independent and unfiltered coverage of the clinical trial industry.
We want to talk about what you want to hear. So if you have something on your mind, hit us up at notetofilepodcast.com.